Thank you, Chair, and thank you all for coming today. First of all, Minister, I need to thank Minister Pitt for the meeting he arranged in response to Ms Ferapix and Mr Reynolds accepting my invitation to meet with them and some farmers last week. It was very informative, so I thank them for that and honouring their commitment. And we're awaiting the results of the science into the flooding and the recapturing of water through the Barmah. I also want to acknowledge Mr Reynolds in particular for admitting to the farmers quite openly and objectively that they need to, the Murray-Darling Basin Authority needs to listen and engage more effectively and to really listen. So that was very well received. Perhaps I could just start by asking people to confirm these were some of the things that we agreed to, Dr Glyde, Mr Glyde, yep, last time, and also with Mr Keelty at the last Senate estimates. You have a very difficult position. It's difficult for everyone. There's enormous complexity in the basin. There's enormous variability. There's a lack of data. And to that I would add now there are a lot of political interests and vested interests. And this is not being unkind to anyone, there simply is a high level of ignorance and a low level of understanding of some basic issues. So that makes it very difficult for you to do your job.
Correct.
Thank you. I was at Moolameen in early December and almost with the town meeting and almost broke into tears because of the damage that's being done. And I see that right across the basin. Now there's been a regime change. Are you familiar, Mr Glyde, with John Briscoe's brief report? I think it was written about 2011? 2010.
Yep. I can't say I've read every page, but we are aware of the document. Yep,
it's not long, concerns. It's only 5 pages, yeah. To me, put in context with going around the basin for 5 weeks, that was very meaningful. And what I can see is that the bureaucrats are getting squeezed. And more so when the victims awake, as they are now, because the victims, the farmers, are really awakening and they've had enough. So I want to be very clear that with the questions I'm asking, as I explained to and realised with Mr Reynolds and Ms Werepek, I'm not attacking the public servants. They're doing the best they can. I'm really just trying to pinpoint the system. It's no longer north versus south, is it, Mr Glyde? That's not going to work.
I'm not sure what you mean by north versus
south.
south.
Well, we've got southern farmers thinking the problem is in the north. We've got southern farmers thinking the problem is in Adelaide. We've got Queenslanders thinking the problem is in Adelaide or the south.
That's it. I think that's
not going to work.
No, and indeed that's why the basin plan exists, is because we're trying to manage the basin in its entirety, not just for our particular interests, which really was the practice prior to that. You had the various states doing their own thing to maximise their returns from the river. And the whole premise of the basin plan is to manage it as a whole. And you'd be very familiar, having done the trips that you've done up and down the basin, you'd be very familiar with the fact that people upstream are always seen as thieves and people downstream are always seen as whingers, and it doesn't matter where on the river you are. And I think that's the very nature of water management right around the world.
Perhaps, and Briscoe said there was a regime change in 2007, and he said, in his view, and a lot of farmers and experts like Peter Millington, the last Murray-Darling Basin Commissioner, agreed that there was a change and we went from the best system in the world to now something that's not the best. That's what some people believe. But what I'm trying to say is that there's been a failure.
That's not exactly what Professor Briscoe said.
That's the way I read it.
Well, I think if you're going to quote the late Professor Briscoe, who is a highly regarded water expert, you need to sort of clarify and get the quotes right. He did highlight that we had a world-leading system in 2007 and even right through till 2010. His paper was questioning whether there was a need for further reform or whether we had a good enough system at the time. But he didn't make commentary about the regime change.
He certainly did, as I read it, because he made it very clear that the political drivers of the Water Act is what's destroyed the Murray-Darling Basin. He made that very clear.
So I think we're getting to commentary. Let's leave that.
I'd
if
agree.
You move on to your question, please, Senator Roberts.
So what I'm after is data, because that's the only way to resolve this objectively. We've all agreed on that in the past. My position is that there is a need for good governance to return to the Murray-Darling Basin, and I'm not blaming the bureaucrats for that. I'm not after any gotchas, okay? I just want the data because there are a lot of people hurting. So One Nation, and my first question is that One Nation and many other voices have been calling for an urgent audit of floodplain harvesting for a long time. Nothing was done. Now with the rain, and we understand with satellites, we are seeing substantial conflict between the farmers in the northern and southern basins over floodplain harvesting again. Does the Murray-Darling Basin Authority concede that failure to audit floodplain harvesting has produced this conflict because farmers simply do not know the truth of the matter?
No. We don't concede it. I think as we've been through before, Senator Roberts, that in a system as large and as complex as the Murray-Darling Basin, there's a whole range of different water takes. Some of these are really well measured, so if someone's pumping out of a river, you get a very accurate measure from a metre. Some of them, these takes have been going on for quite a number of decades, are harder to measure. Floodplain harvesting is one of those. One of the great things about the Basin Plan, and I do reject the notion that the 2007 Water Act was a step backwards, is it's a huge step forward. But one of the great things about the Murray-Darling Basin Plan is it brings all forms of take in to be considered. And indeed, one of the things that's well underway as a result of the Basin Plan is both New South Wales and Queensland are moving towards the regulation of floodplain harvesting and the accurate measurement of it. Certainly, it's nowhere near as accurately measured as it is if you're directly pumping out of the river, but we're on a path to better reflect it so that understandable tension that you've referred to that exists between farmers in one part of the basin and the other can be removed. We're on a path to make sure that there's greater trust in the system, in the forms of take, and I think it's really you're making a point about a point in time. The floodplain harvesting take has always been measured. It just can be measured in better ways, and that's what we're engaged in doing.
Well, we've had a situation until recently with the very welcome rains where everything's been dry.
Yep.
So have you got satellite measurements of dams on properties now and estimates of the harvest, the water harvest?
And that's really indeed what Queensland and New South Wales are engaged in doing, both in slightly different ways, as reflects the fact that each state's different. But both of New South Wales and Queensland are in the process of regulating that taking, being in a position to be able to measure it better. And we certainly applaud that work, and we've been part of that work. Dr. Derham can perhaps explain how the different systems work, but we really do think this is a big step forward. It's a very complex issue to understand how bringing floodplain harvesting into the accounting framework is actually going to improve things. People think that more water's being taken. The water's always been taken. It's just been accounted as a loss. It's really quite critical that we do measure it, because once you start to measure it and measure it better than we currently are, then people can have, all players in the water market can have faith that someone's not ripping them off.
Agreed. So the data is going to solve this.
Yeah,
that's
absolutely.
right. Objective data.
And so, just in that context, the government's investing over $50 million to assist New South Wales in developing its floodplain harvesting policy, and a further $35 million in remote sensing technology to assist in measurement of that. So I think the government's acknowledged that.
And it is important to acknowledge other places too, like Cubby, for example. I've been over Cubby a couple of times, and they do a great job of measuring, and they comply with the regulations, and they actually release water or let water flow past them that they are authorised to take to preserve the environment of the river, because they understand the river environment is important for their own business and the community. So there are some very positive steps in there, but it's an ideal opportunity now where we've gone from dry to dams filled to have an audit.
Yep. And indeed, that's really what's underway. That's the whole purpose of these, and indeed those commitments are enshrined as part of the water resource planning process, and it's in the Queensland water resource plans, and we're very, very hopeful they'll be in the New South Wales water resource plans when they come to us.
Senator Roberts, you raise a very good point about what's the information base and what's our confidence in that. We raised that question particularly with New South Wales about 18 months ago. And as a result of that, we worked cooperatively with them to have some independent reviewers come in. Those independent reviewers were Tony Webber from Alluvium Consulting and Greg Clayton. They undertook a review on behalf of both the MDBA and New South Wales to understand the information and evidence base that existed to be able to identify how much infrastructure was in the landscape and how New South Wales might best go about understanding the volumes of interception as they progress with their Healthy Floodplain project, which my department colleagues just referred to as around the $50 million mark that the Commonwealth's co-investing to see that regulatory process rolled out in New South Wales. That review did find that there were some gaps, but there was a reasonable amount of good information available for New South Wales to continue to pursue and go ahead and implement that licensing program. So that is currently underway by the New South Wales Government. It is called their Healthy Floodplains project.
We can provide that to you, Senator, if that would help.
That would, thank you. And before I move on to the next question, I certainly think that the Water Act of 2007, the Turnbull-Howard Water Act, is a serious problem. So and that's echoed by a lot of people in the Murray-Darling Basin.
Roberts, will this be your last question?
I'm
just trying to sort time, that's all.
Yes, I'll make it my last and we'll get back to it later.
Thank you.
The National Water Initiative in 2004 called for a register of water ownership by 2006. Irrigation authorities know who owns the water in their patch, so transferring those records into a national database should be a simple process. Yet here we are in 2020 and we still do not know who owns the water, who's getting the water. Will you create a national water register of water ownership?
So, Senator, there was some work done and I think agreed in 2008 by COAG to develop a national water market system, which was not only a register of entitlements but a more fundamental platform for allowing trade in that connected water market. That project proceeded for a number of years but was ceased by the then government.
Which government was that, Mr Thompson?
June 2012, I think. It was due to be completed in 2012, but despite having invested $30 million in that project, it failed to deliver. So we'll confirm that date, Senator, but I think it was around 2012, 2013. Yeah.
That was cancelled even though 50 million, how much? 50 million?
30,
sorry, thank you.
And at present, there's no plans to develop a national water register. But as you know, the government has requested that the ACCC undertake an inquiry into water markets in the Murray-Darling Basin, and we will be interested in the advice that the ACCC provides on that issue.
I'm pleased to see you agreeing that we need that. Because that
I'm not sure that I agree that we need it.
Okay,
we certainly need advice on whether it's needed, Senator.
Well, data will help. So,
Senator Roberts.
Thank you, Chair. The Australian Antarctic Division have produced a 1,000-year climate reconstruction of the Southern Basin. This reconstruction shows 10-year droughts, 10 major droughts in the last 1,000 years, each with a duration of between 20 and 29 years. That is only a reconstruction, but are you familiar with this study from 2014?
Not personally, but yeah.
Okay, do you accept that the Murray River would have run dry to the lower lakes during such an extended drought?
I think there would be, in the pre-European settlement times, there would have been times when the Murray would have had a very reduced flow.
Yep.
And indeed, that's part of the evidence that was examined during the course of the setting up of the Basin Plan.
Thank you. I'm just wondering, if we've had 10 droughts more severe than the current drought, how could this current drought be due to climate change, but the others were not? But setting that aside for a minute, given this prevalence of drought in our country, which wouldn't surprise anyone, should we be planning increased major dam storage to cover the next major drought, or do you believe that dams don't make rain like they believe in Victoria?
There's a number of elements to that question, and I'll have a crack at possibly a couple of them.
And my point is, not just the dams store water,
yeah.
They spread,
so
they eliminate, reduce the variability.
Yeah. So two things, exactly right, Senator, that dams don't make it rain, but what they do is capture the rain that does fall and any runoff. and enables people to regulate the supply of water more easily. What we've observed is that within the Murray-Darling Basin there's a finite amount of water, and what the Basin Plan has done is within that estimated availability of water, what is a sustainable level of take that the system can endure and not be put into circumstance where it's not healthy. And so what we do is set the limit, if you like, as to how much water can be taken, the sustainable diversion limit. And then if for example, a state government was wanting to put in place a new piece of water infrastructure to improve the efficiency with which water might move around, then they're more than welcome to do so, as long as they don't exceed that overall level of take. And sometimes dams do actually cost you water through things like evaporation and the like, through other losses.
It's just that a dam captures the peaks, and the peaks right now, without a dam, are missed. And that peak just flows out into the ocean, the Southern Ocean.
Yeah,
that's what rivers do.
Correct.
Flow out into the
In
ocean.
some ways, Senator, it's also important to remember that rivers need to flow out to the ocean to be healthy. And we often get statements in the media that there shouldn't be any water running out over through the mouth of the Murray, and that basically, if you were to do that, you would have environmental problems all the way down the river. You're not taking the salt that would naturally go out of the system.
There are many factors, but it's not just a matter of levels; it's a matter of the variability, and especially the peak, and harvesting that.
And that's indeed what dams and regulation has changed in the way in which the river is operated.
That's right.
I hope you're not proposing we take the dams out so that we can let those peaks flow.
Senator Davey, we've been advocating more dams, many more, from the north right through to the south. Broken Hill, Menindee and Burke have all had welcome falls of rain in the last week. More rain is coming down the northern river system, so there's an expectation that Menindee will fill with water very soon. Are you going to drain the Menindee lakes again?
I get a bit sensitive about the term drain. And we manage the lakes, the Menindee lakes, along with all the other dams and locks and weirs in the connected system, the River Murray system, to get the most efficient use out of that water. And the Commonwealth, have control over how that water is used when the dam levels the water levels in Menindee are over a certain amount, which I think is 640 gigalitres, and then we use the water with the rest of the Murray system to do that. We will, to use your term, drain the lakes. We'll use that water as efficiently as we can, and the efficiency thing is quite important. The reason we take water from the Menindee lakes, generally speaking, on average first, is because it is the storage that is the least efficient in the Murray system. So the storages that we have in the Victorian New South Wales highlands, they don't evaporate anywhere near as much water. So it makes sense when the water is in Menindee to use that water when it's available. And so what we have observed, and so we've got a fair bit of criticism in relation to using that water first, but it actually is a fundamental part of underpinning water allocations for irrigators all throughout the southern system. The other thing we'd observed too, Senator, is that over the last 20 or 30 years, the inflows into Menindee lakes seem to be lower than they were over the previous period of record that we have. And so there's some questions in relation to that that we need to examine. Is this a step change? Is it just an aberration in the climate sequence or not? But these are all things that we have to take into account when we're determining how to run the system as efficiently as we can.
Well, we could have a discussion about the efficiency of storing water in Menindee versus storing water in Lake Alexandrina. Yep. We could also have a discussion about the cycles that drive our climate naturally. But what I'm more concerned about is agriculture from Menindee to Wentworth has now been wiped out, with the last large irrigators recently accepting a settlement to close. Is the loss of 200 kilometres of formerly productive irrigated farms a win or a loss for the plan?
It's a really good question, Senator, in the sense that what the Basin Plan does, as we talked before, is it removes, on a rough figure, about 20% of the water that was previously used in consumption. It's now returned to the environment on average over the course of the the operation of the plan. You don't take 20% of the water out of consumption without causing some adverse economic and social impacts. And indeed, I think the number of the reviews and indeed our own work over the last several years has demonstrated there's significant impacts of that removal on towns and communities in the basin. The question you're really asking is the fact that there's fewer irrigators operating in the Lower Darling, that is regrettable. It's unfortunate, but we're trying to put, and the whole reform is trying to put the system, the whole of the Murray-Darling system, on a sustainable footing so that basically irrigators around, right across the basin are in a better position in the future than they might be now. But the inevitability of the reform means that there will be winners and losers. And so in this particular case, it's, and if you're aware of how much water needs to be stored in Lake Menindee in order to provide the security of supply to the people in the Lower Darling, this is not it's one of those consequences of the reform. In order to have, Mr Reynolds will be able to help me out here, but in order to provide, is it 1 gigalitre or, I don't forget how much they have, you need to store a very large amount of water in Menindee Lakes. And so the removal of that demand from the Menindee Lake system means that you can operate the Menindee Lake system more efficiently than you previously could. And that's what this is all about. The overall reform is about trying to find efficiencies in use of water for consumption, but also in water for the environment. And we are going through a huge period of change, which I think the broader community in Australia is unaware of the significance of the impacts that it is causing in towns up and down the basin.
I wonder if the broader community is aware of this, and I don't know if you're aware of this. The CSIRO, in their Australian National Outlook Report 2019, Chapter 2, page 9, calls for an end to, quote, eco-services and markets that favour food production. Food production. An end. End of quote. And their replacement instead with eco-services and markets that favour, quote, land repair. Do you agree, does the Commonwealth Waterholder agree with CSIRO that land repair is a higher priority through to 2050 than food production?
Senator, I'm not familiar with that report or that quote, but what I can say is
Can you table the report, Senator?
I can reference it.
Yeah.
I haven't got it with me.
No.
What I would say though is that our obligations as the MDBA is to operate under the Water Act, and in the Water Act it clearly is we're trying to get a balance of use, that we are trying to make sure that all of the values of the basin, economic, social, environmental, Aboriginal, cultural, recreation, they're all being looked at in their entirety. And clearly, the Murray-Darling Basin, which produces almost half of Australia's food, it's a large chunk of our irrigated agricultural production. That's one of the values we're trying to protect here. And so I know it's difficult when you see 20% of the water being taken out of those communities, but the benefit of that is that we'll know over the next 30 or 40 years that there will still be food production occurring in the Murray-Darling Basin.
Well, there's a concern with the Water Act. That's
Sorry,
for another
Senator
time.
Roberts, we've got to the lunch break. Do you have much longer to go? Should we just run on for another few minutes or...?
Yes, please.
Yeah, all right, just another 5 minutes?
Yep.
We'll have our lunch break.
So what CSIRO is saying in its report is we need to move land from agriculture to collapse agriculture to restore the natural environment. So I can smell the United Nations Rio Declaration in this, but would you categorise the reclamation of 200 kilometres of irrigation along the Lower Darling between Menindee and Wellington as land repair?
I'm not quite sure.
Just a quick comment on the CSIRO report, and I don't have a copy in front of me, unfortunately, but that's the second one of those reports that the CSIRO produced. It works off a number of different scenarios which go to choices that Australia can make. So the quote that you had there was pretty categorical and bald, and I don't know whether there was a broader context to it, but I do know that it is a scenario-based report. And in terms of what, just to reinforce what Mr. Glyde said, that the objects of the Water Act are about outcomes for communities, for the environment, and for thriving agricultural industries in the basin, and that's where government policy is seeking to pitch. So,
thank you.
And I'm not so sure that the people who live down the Lower Darling would say that the last several years have led to massive improvements in their land.
It's certainly not repaired the land.
No, and I think it's a really important point that it will take a very, very long time for some of the benefits of the basin plan, particularly in terms of environmental and outcomes as well, for it to happen. We've had 100 years or more of allocation of water where, with the benefit of hindsight, we now can say we've allocated out too much water. But though it's taken those environmental impacts have grown over time, and so looking to see a really sudden change in the long run health of our ecosystems it's a long way away. And I think it's one of the challenges we have is communicating that, yep, it's rained and the grass turns green, and in the narrow lakes you can see animals and birds and what have you thriving. But in terms of restoring the system to a long run health so it can sustain whatever climate might happen. We might have worse droughts. We might, who knows what's going to happen. But that's really the challenge we've got is to build that resilience. And it's the same with communities. We're trying to find ways to make sure that there will still be towns and communities in the basins that are based on agricultural production. It's one of the critical things we're trying to maintain.
Well, I was nearly at tears at Moolameen in December when I listened to the community down there, because I felt ashamed to be part of Canberra. But the last small irrigators in the Lower Darling are being ignored. Is the Murray-Darling Basin Authority just waiting for them to go broke and walk off the land, or will they be getting some deal?
Can I?
It's not really one for me to answer, Senator, in terms of implementing the basin plan.
Senator Davey mentioned about the deal for the southern irrigators on the Lower Darling. My understanding, I checked in the break, was that the deal was done with the larger irrigators, Talano first, and then the medium-sized irrigators, but the small irrigators are still waiting for compensation or a deal. Is that correct?
No.
It's not our understanding, Senator, but we're happy to follow that up.
What is the understanding?
The agreement that was reached between the Commonwealth and the Lower Darling Horticulture Group. The Lower Darling Horticulture Group was a consortium or a grouping of irrigators in the Lower Darling who chose to cooperate together in their in making representation to the Commonwealth to sell their water, and they're all high security. Yes.
Are there any high security licences in the Lower Darling that haven't been bought by the Commonwealth? There are people who are entitled to water. I believe
some very small quantities still left. So after this, this particular transaction was for 1.159 gigalitres of high security water. There is a very small amount which primarily operates as stock and domestic. So it's high security, but it's as a stock and domestic.
I understand too, if you could confirm it or correct me, that someone is paying the grape farmers in the Lower Darling to return their land to Gaia, nature. That's obviously not the Murray-Darling Basin Authority. Is it some New South Wales agency, do you know? It's been reported that they're being paid to return it to nature.
They were paid to take out their plantings, that's what they wanted.
I wonder if Senator Roberts could provide a reference.
Yeah.
So we'll just so I can look it up. Perhaps even on the internet.
From my staff, I just got to know.
So, Senator, all we're aware of is that part of the agreement to purchase the water involved returning land to non-irrigated agriculture.
Yeah.
But whether that's in the way that you framed it then in terms of land restoration or those sorts of things, we're not privy to that. We're not aware of that.
All right, thank you.
And
No, I'm just wondering, that's what I was looking for.
And surely the motivation is simply, it's not about returning it to its original state. It's because they've got high security water and they're not getting water delivered to them.
That's right. So it's not about original state. It's just saying this is non-irrigated agricultural land.
Can your monitoring of the social and economic impacts and cultural impacts confirm that family farmers, who I see as the bedrock of rural communities and environmental care, are being driven off the land in between the ones who are going from loss of water rather, and others who are being bought out by corporates?
I'm not sure what's the question.
The question is that we've got farmers leaving the land, they're being driven off the land, Some have sold their water access and they've lost their water, and others are being bought out by corporates.
They didn't lose it, they sold it.
I think Sir Roberts might be referring to the fact that when you look at the basin-wide scale, you've got growth in agriculture, growth in irrigated agriculture, growth in population. But what those figures mask is the fact that there's been differential impacts that there have been as a result of water trade, as a result of water recovery, and that some farmers, small farmers, have either sold or leased their water, and they've been adversely affected. And I think the only thing, we don't monitor at that level, but there's a review underway that's being led by Robbie Sefton that has been looking around at socioeconomic impacts, and they've done some recent work on trying to gauge some of those sort of more detailed impacts. And I understand that report will be being provided publicly relatively soon, but that might shed a bit of light on the issue. But certainly there's been the overall figures do mask a lot of highs and lows. People who've won and done very well out of water reform, and people who haven't.
Thank you. Can you give an assurance to the family farm irrigators along Yanko Creek between Murrumbidgee and the Murray that they are not targeted for elimination in the same manner that the lower Darling irrigators were?
So,
There's a lot of concern in that area that they're being driven off in favour of large corporates further down the Murrumbidgee.
Matt, well, just a first comment that we wouldn't characterise the Lower Darling as having the irrigators there, senators, having been targeted by us. Those irrigators came to the Commonwealth seeking a deal, but in terms of Yanko Creek.
I was simply going to say, Senator, that Yanko Creek is a project that's in the bucket of the SDL adjustment mechanism projects that is being brought forward by the New South Wales government, and it's about being more efficient in the use of water. Mr. Reynolds might have a little bit more detail than I have, but really it is a question of that project is now being scoped, reviewed, consulted on with the community, and so I don't think we've got much more information than that about Yanko Creek, and probably that question's best directed at the New South Wales government, who's got responsibility for bringing that project forward, unless Mr. Reynolds has more information than I have.
Only in the detail of the project, which looks at changing the use of water in Yanko Creek and the Lower Murrumbidgee, how water's directed through there. Part of the development of the project is clearly about understanding the impacts of a changed watering regime through that part of the world, and ensuring that any impacts on irrigation as well as on the environment are accounted for in the development of that project. It's got a long way to go through investigation, design, approvals processes, and those issues will be managed through that.
The community contacted us, my office, and they're worried that large corporates are buying land outside the current irrigation area further downstream along the Murrumbidgee, and they would benefit from getting the water by killing Yanko as an irrigation area.
I'm not aware that that's a particular driver. There is development of irrigation in various areas, including in the Murrumbidgee Valley, but that's not directly linked to an impact on the Yanko Creek arrangements.
With South Australia working on the South East Drains Restoration Project to return the freshwater flows to their natural path, renewing the lower lakes with every rain event, do you accept that the boundaries of the Murray-Darling Basin should be restored to include the parts of the southeast of South Australia that naturally flow into the basin, as they were originally?
Essentially the question is, do we need to redesign the boundaries of the Murray-Darling Basin?
Return them to the way they were, because the southeast drains used to flow into the lower Coorong, not into the ocean. Sorry, the southeast water used to flow into the lower Coorong.
Yep. And I guess the project that's underway there is to try and help out the environment of the Coorong, particularly that part of it, by having some fresh water come through. I'm not quite sure. We've had various proposals being put forward as to changing the boundaries of the Murray-Darling Basin catchment, and I'm not quite sure that project would be indicating that you need to change the boundaries, but I'd have to take that one on notice, Senator. But
it all depends on where the mouth of the Murray is, isn't it?
Well,
where it enters Lake Alexandrina or where it enters the ocean.
Yeah, and I guess it's one of those things that there's an accepted definition of what the boundaries are of the Murray-Darling Basin. I guess we work with that accepted definition until it's changed. But I don't think there's been a huge push to change that boundary. I don't know, Mr. Reynolds.
My understanding is that before the drains were built, the basin included that southeast area that drained into the lower Coorong. Now it doesn't. So there was a change, in fact.
I think it's not. Sorry.
Senator Roberts, sorry, you've got limited time for your questions. Is this a line that you want to keep pursuing now? Because I believe you might be able to go and speak to the department directly about that.
Okay, I'll do that.
Or the Murray-Darling Basin Authority.
Okay. We'd be happy to provide the maps and the history, certainly better than my knowledge as well.
Okay, thank you. When the barrages were built on the lower lakes and the lakes backfilled with fresh water, the water capacity was raised 42% from around 1,200 gigalitres to 1,700 gigalitres. Now, I've driven around those lakes and that area is fairly flat, certainly gently sloped. In other words, the lakes are now higher as fresh water than they were when they were estuarine. And the area of the lake would be much, much bigger. Evaporation would now be much more of a problem than it was. Will you reduce the lower lakes to their original natural level to reduce that evaporation, because it seems to be important when you consider Menindee versus Lake Alexandrina? But if not, why not?
Mr. Reynolds.
So I guess there are two things here. The lower lakes, the ecology around the lower lakes that is established there now is of high value and is managed accordingly. A decision to change the level of the lower lakes would have to be done with South Australia. They do manage and operate the lower lakes. There is a need to be able to release water from the lower lakes into the Coorong for the benefit of the ecology there and the maintenance of the Coorong. If you don't hold the lower lakes above sea level, then you can't actually get the water out, and that's one of the challenges as the lakes get lower. The ability to release water from the lower lakes, for all of the reasons that's important, is compromised. So I think it's not as simple as saying the lower lakes should be smaller or lower in terms of managing those impacts. Certainly, as the lakes get lower and as they get down to 0 metres AHD, there's a whole lot of issues that emerge around acid sulphate soils and the like. I don't have, with the levels that you're talking about, I don't have great familiarity of exactly what the area of extent would be on that. But I think lowering the lakes, as you say, and then trying to maintain a flow through fishways and the like would be severely compromised.
Okay, thank you. Just, I know my time is almost up, Chair, so I'll just finish with this question for now. And it's just a question to put to you, given the enormous difference between the southern Murray-Darling Basin around the Murray and Murrumbidgee network and the Darling Basin. Yep. They are connected and regulated. The southern basin is more connected, more regulated, more uniform. They were your words today. Much less variation. The Darling, highly variable in so many ways. Would it be more accurate and more productive? I'm not advocating this necessarily because I haven't got the data. But would it be more accurate and productive to treat the Murray and Darling separately and possibly less injurious by keeping them separate and having them under separate management? Just a thought for people to consider, because a lot of the problems are due to that conflicting.
Yeah.
And as a question to see whether anyone else is doing that.
I guess from my perspective, I think it makes sense to manage the system as a whole rather than not. And okay. There is a benefit in having as common as you can in a federation, common approaches to water management to make sure that you are actually getting maximum value out of the asset that is the Murray-Darling Basin.
I can see that, but if the management of the whole is compromised because the two can't really be treated as a whole, then you're defeating exactly what you said.
Yeah,
all right. Thank you very much for the question, Senator Roberts.